She was only 15 years old when she stepped onto a television set that would change her life forever. The lights were hotter than she expected. The jokes were sharper than anything she had heard before. And the world she was entering was far more complicated than anyone had prepared her for. But what she didn't know yet was that someone in that room had already decided to protect her. For decades, the truth about what really happened behind the scenes of Married with Children remained largely untold. Fans saw the laughter. They saw the outrageous insults. They saw the dysfunctional family that somehow made everyone feel at home. What they didn't see was the bond that quietly formed between a teenage girl and the man playing her father, and how that bond would outlast fame, controversy, heartbreak, and even devastating illness. Because this wasn't just a television story. It was real, and it would last a lifetime. When Christina Applegate first walked onto the set in 1987, she was stepping into a world few teenagers could truly understand. She had been cast as Kelly Bundy, the beautiful airhead daughter in a sitcom that wasn't afraid to break every rule television had followed for decades. The show was bold, it was controversial, and it didn't apologize for either. But Christina wasn't thinking about controversy. She was thinking about survival. She was 15. Still figuring out who she was, still growing into herself. And suddenly, she was surrounded by adults who had years of experience navigating an industry known for building people up and tearing them down just as quickly. Among them was Ed O'Neill. At the time, Ed was in his early 40s. He had seen disappointment. He had faced rejection. He understood how fragile success could be. And more importantly, he understood how vulnerable young actors could become once the spotlight found them. From the very beginning, he noticed Christina, not as a coworker, not as a performer, but as a kid who needed someone in her corner. He never announced it. He never made it obvious. He simply stayed close, watching, listening, making sure she was okay. At first, Christina didn't realize what he was doing. She only knew that whenever things felt overwhelming, Ed was there. Whenever conversations drifted into territory that felt too adult, he gently redirected them. Whenever the environment became uncomfortable, he found ways to restore balance. He didn't do it because anyone asked him to. He did it because he cared. And over time, that quiet protection became something much deeper. It became trust. The role of Kelly Bundy quickly turned Christina into one of the most recognizable young faces in America. But with recognition came attention. And with attention came expectations she was still too young to fully understand. Her character was written as a teenage sex symbol. The wardrobe, the jokes, the audience reactions, all of it placed her in a position that could have easily become overwhelming. But Ed made sure it didn't. He stood between her and the pressures she wasn't ready to face. Crew members noticed it. They saw the way he checked on her between takes. They saw how he stayed nearby during scenes that made her uncomfortable. They saw how he treated her not as an equal, but as someone he felt responsible for protecting. There were nights when filming ran late, and Ed would personally make sure she got home safely. There were moments when he called her family to reassure them she was safe. There were conversations behind closed doors where he reminded her of something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. That she mattered, not because of ratings, not because of fame, but because she was human. And for a teenager growing up under a microscope, that reminder meant everything. But the real test of their bond didn't come from fame. It came from crisis. In 1989, the show faced a threat no one had anticipated. A woman named Terry Ricalta launched a boycott against the series, outraged by its content. She contacted advertisers. She rallied support. She demanded the show be removed from television entirely. And for a moment, it looked like it might work. Major companies pulled their ads. Executives panicked. Meetings were held behind closed doors. The future of the show hung in the balance. Christina was only 17. This wasn't just a job to her. It was her life, her stability, her identity. And suddenly it could all disappear. Fear spread across the set. No one knew what would happen next. But Ed remained calm. He gathered the younger actors, including David Faustino, and spoke to them in a way they would never forget. He told them that their worth wasn't defined by the survival of the show. He told them they had already accomplished something meaningful. He reminded them that no matter what happened next, they would be okay. He gave them something more valuable than certainty. He gave them strength. And in a twist no one expected, the boycott had the opposite effect. Public curiosity exploded. Ratings climbed higher than ever before. The controversy didn't destroy the show. It made it stronger. But for Christina, the most important part wasn't the ratings. It was knowing Ed had never left her side. For 11 years, they worked together, almost every day. 11 years of shared routines, shared laughter, shared growth. He watched her transform from a nervous teenager into a confident young woman. He watched her find her voice. He watched her discover her power. And he never stopped being proud of her. When the show ended in 1997, there was no grand farewell. No emotional goodbye. It simply stopped. One day they were a family. The next day they weren't. The set was dismantled. The lights went dark. Everyone went their separate ways. But not really. Because some connections don't end when the cameras stop rolling. They stay with you. Christina continued building her career, starring in films, earning awards, and eventually finding new success in shows like Dead to Me. Meanwhile, Ed experienced a career resurgence with Modern Family, introducing him to a new generation of fans. But no matter how far their careers took them, they never lost touch. They called each other, checked in on each other, stayed connected, because what they had wasn't just professional. It was personal. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 2021, Christina received news that would alter the course of her life forever. She had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a disease with no cure, a disease that would challenge her mobility, her independence, and her future. Suddenly, everyday tasks became difficult. Walking required assistance. Energy became limited. The body she had relied on her entire life began to feel unfamiliar. The diagnosis didn't just affect her physically, it affected her emotionally. There were moments of grief, moments of anger, moments of uncertainty about what the future would hold. And in those moments, Ed was there, just like he had always been. He reached out immediately. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He offered presence, support, understanding. He reminded her that she wasn't facing this alone. And neither did the rest of her television family. Katie Sagal, who had played her mother, stood beside her. Amanda Burse reached out with love and encouragement. The people who had shared her earliest years in the spotlight rallied around her once again. Because to them, she wasn't just a co-star. She was family. In 2022, Christina made her first major public appearance since her diagnosis. She arrived at the ceremony honoring her with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame using a cane. Each step required effort. Each movement required courage. But she walked forward anyway, because she refused to disappear. She refused to let the disease define her. She stood before the crowd, emotional but unbroken, surrounded by people who had been part of her journey from the very beginning. And somewhere among those who supported her was Ed, still watching over her, still proud, still there. Months later, she appeared at an award ceremony, and something remarkable happened. As she walked onto the stage, the audience rose to their feet. The applause didn't stop. It continued, and continued. For nearly a full minute, the room stood in recognition of not just her career, but her strength. Christina stood there, overwhelmed, not because of the attention, but because of what it represented. Proof that she hadn't been forgotten. Proof that she was still loved. Proof that everything she had endured mattered. And afterward, as she reflected on that moment, she realized something profound. The relationships she had built decades earlier were still holding her up, still carrying her forward, still giving her strength. In recent years, Christina found a new way to share her voice through her podcast, Messy, where she speaks openly about her experiences, her struggles, and her resilience. Through it all, one truth remains constant. Ed is still there, still encouraging her, still believing in her. still protecting her in the quiet ways that matter most. Their bond was never about television. It was about humanity, about kindness, about showing up for someone when they need you most. Because when Christina first stepped onto that set as a 15-year-old girl, she had no way of knowing that the man playing her father would become one of the most important people in her life. She couldn't have known that decades later, when her world became uncertain, he would still be standing beside her. She couldn't have known that their connection would outlast fame, success, and even illness. But it did. Because some relationships are stronger than time, stronger than distance, stronger than anything life can throw at them. And even now, after everything they've been through, one truth remains undeniable. He never stopped being there for her. And he never will. Because sometimes the most important family you find is the one you never expected.